Well, Charles, today we have a league of extraordinary criminals. How are you doing?
Doing well. I'm doing well. I'm a little bit upset that we haven't seen any chatter about exposing charity gangster cheats, which would be this would be the perfect window to do it. Whereas
Oh, right.
Sunday night where you are, we've got Monday, the day before tax day, and tax day. This would be a good moment to slip out into the public domain that when you use charities to steal from the public and enrich yourself, and when you should know better because you're a lawyer, and in the case of Bill Clinton, you're attorney general, governor, president, Hillary, secretary of state, presidential candidate. Joe Biden's just a knucklehead, but
Every one of these buffoons is a lawyer, or was.
right, and B Rock and the others. I mean, what they've done is they all think, and maybe justifiably so, that they have the cheat code. You know, you are a public servant for a period of time, and that gives you the cheat code that you can set up multiple crooked charities. You can fund your high living through illegal contributions made to these fake charities, secure in the knowledge that the FBI in New York and the FBI in Washington, D.C., and the FBI in the major blue cities is not only not going to do anything, but they're going to obstruct any real investigations alongside the IRS and the Department of Justice. And the reason they're going to do it is they're going to argue first and foremost that a lot of these flows are classified, and if we were to expose the true nature of this deceit, that would have an impact on our sensitive international and domestic operations. Well, that's a bullshit argument. And it's just bullshit piled on more bullshit. Somebody has a tweet on my feed that claims, and I don't know if it's true, that of the 19 Saudi hijackers, John Brennan personally granted visas to 15 of them.
Passports, I thought. Visas,
Well,
passports, whatever it was. But
right.
yes, he was the head of the Riyadh office for the CIA,
Right.
and that's been known for a long time that he issued the visas or the passports to those guys.
And then somebody else says something out there that SEAL Team 6 was assassinated, and that was done with the knowledge and forethought of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and others. So, I think what we've been doing here, at least what I've been doing, and thinking about charity fraud, is I've been missing a portion of the picture, though I think I know a lot about it. And that is that what we get fed through Cy Hirsch, through David Ignatius, through maybe O'Keefe and others, is stories that are juicy enough to get us interested, but are not the core of the issue. And the core of the issue is that the good people who fund this government in the private sector are being ripped off on a daily basis by corrupt officials in both parties. And this has been going on really perhaps before the advent of stupidism, globalism, but maybe before 1988. But it was revved up on steroids from 1988 forward, where we were all, fed. Hillary Clinton had this sinister plot in 15, 16 to dirty Trump up as a Russian agent. Hillary and Bill Clinton are agents of the Chinese Communist Party. It's just obvious. There's so many stories. They may not even know they're agents of the Chinese Communist Party, but there's so many separate strands of the Clinton scandal connect that family and Arkansas to sinister interests in and connected to the CCP and also to Taiwan. And so the prime beneficiaries of stupidism, of unregulated globalism, have been Taiwan and the Chinese Communist Party. And under them, other nations in Southeast Asia, and connected to them and allied with them, various corrupt governments in Europe. They've all had a system where they pretend to work, but they actually don't do any real work. Any real studies are done by consulting firms who are paid fat contracts that they shouldn't get in the first place. They go to conferences, they have meetings with one another, they pat each other on the back, they collect honoraria, they collect awards, they go around, they get book deals and live in mansions and fly private. And it's all a fucking joke, a very bad, sinister joke. And Trump is trying to undo all of that. But it's not enough to simply take most of the termites out of your house. You're going to have to termite-proof your house if you want to continue to live in it. That involves a lot of work. And by analogy, if we want to termite-proof the largest organization on earth, which is the federal U.S. government, we've got to put a lot of people in prison. There've got to be examples. People who thought they were above the law. Now it's this fat bitch attorney general in New York, Tish James.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she belongs in prison for the rest of her life. All of, fines big enough to break her. And she can spend the rest of her life in prison contemplating her abuses. Next to her, in the cell next to her, should be this idiot Jasmine Crockett, who it now appears that the guy running against her in Texas is a brilliant guy. He's going to every person listed as a donor to the Crockett campaign of the past and ask these people on camera, are you aware that somebody using your name has said that you gave $14,000 to Jasmine Crockett? And the people invariably are poor and knew nothing about it. AOC, the rumors about her, and Bondi finally doing something about her encouraging people to break the immigration law as a sitting congressman, and indeed hiring an illegal alien and getting that person from Colombia a Social Security number. How did she do that? I mean, these people who think, and what's her name, Squaw Warren, Pocahontas, who puts out these, one tweet is more asinine than the next. She's fighting Donald Trump, who's about to steal your Social Security. Somebody who appropriated the identity of a Native American person to secure tenure at Harvard as no less than a law professor, and then went on to create a crooked organization, this Consumer Protection Bureau racket, in which she arranged for herself to be installed with no oversight possible of her and no ability to remove her. And from there, she runs for the Senate and pretends that she's a viable candidate as president. This person, in a different era, would be in an insane asylum wrapped in one of those white suits,
Straight jacket. But Charles, one small correction. There's no way that stupidism began in the 1980s. I believe the Bible tells us that God created stupid on the second day.
Well, you know what I mean. Before 1988, before the Berlin Wall fell, it really was imprudent, if you're an American or Western European country, to contemplate making large investments in China and India, and indeed in the former what were the Eastern European nations. So the idea, it was a concept. People did have multinational factories around the world, but it was revved up after 1988, after the Berlin Wall fell, after the Soviet Union imploded, after India adopted a pro-capitalist approach as opposed to a socialist dirt sandwich eating approach in 95 with the change in that government there. Stupidism became much more feasible. And then with privatizations, the opportunity in the Clinton years to rip off the Russian public and the Eastern European public, and indeed before that in Western Europe with privatizations, you're right, those occurred starting in the early 1980s across Western Europe. These were all opportunities for crooked politicians to use the World Bank, the IMF, the Federal Reserve, and other powerful financial institutions to borrow money, to buy assets owned by governments at prices that are unfairly low and rigged so that insiders could acquire vast fortunes without really doing any work. And this is something that's happened if you go back to 1980, it's like 45 years of this. Virtually every single person featured there has wealth today because of this crooked enterprise. And there needs to be a reckoning. Barack Obama and his wife, now with no children in the nest, should be able to get by on a 1,500 square foot apartment after they spend the next 20 to 40 years in prison. They don't need 4 mansions, nor do the Clintons. Hunter Biden, the notion that the mainstream press, that the White House Correspondents Group should be opening their pie holes about anything to do with Trump after they spent 4 years pretending that a mental midget with the IQ of a Cocoa Puff, Joe Biden, was compos mentis, right? How could all of those people who say they're White House correspondents, who were inside the White House, who could smell the dirty diapers of Joe Biden and could watch his mind evaporate before their eyes. How can those people call themselves journalists? They are propaganda shills. Any one of those people, and indeed, I like Peter Doocy, but he wasn't tough enough on Latrine, right?
What could he have done, though? She constantly... I thought he was going to make out with her by the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe he had a shot. But the point is, we get nothing out of the mainstream journalist pool. Nothing. And now, the stories that you and I have covered and that you've covered independently for me, these were stories that were very controversial back in June of 2017 and afterwards. And indeed, your channel was demolished on YouTube how many separate times? And
10.
Virtually all the stories that were controversial and that were the result that caused you to be demonetized were true at the time. And people
Absolutely.
are realizing they're true now and pretending, wow, aren't I fantastic? I figured out that EcoHealth Alliance was a fraud in 2025. No, you're a moron. We talked about that in 2020.
Well, Charles, people, there's something going on right now where it's interesting. Remember Donie O'Sullivan?
Yeah, I do.
He came up, and I posted something about him that I'd like to play for you for a minute because it's pretty important. Here it is, actually. Let's listen to Stupid Donnie. This was January 6th in Washington, D.C., and this was a meeting in the Hyatt being held by January 6th families and whatever. So here's Donnie. And I just noticed on playback there's an easy rig against the wall, which is what Art Vistham had on January 13th. July 13th. Donnie, have you seen George's latest nonsense?
Yeah, you and George not friends anymore, or what's going on?
Well, George and I haven't been working with each other since 2017. But you seem to have been very interested in everything that he's done.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
You still crowdsourcing?
What happened with the Benassis?
Benassis? You did the story on them.
Yeah. You seem to work for the FBI.
Do I?
You do, yeah. You're always covering stories the way they want them covered. How come nobody was interested in the fact that George Webb live stream happened on a channel called Jason Goodman? The FBI never called me. You covered it from the angle of George doing everything. The FBI never even asked me. What did I know about it? What?
You were bummed you didn't get the attention.
No, it's not that I was bummed. It's that I've come to realize that I was set up by George, and it seemed like you and the FBI and George and his brother were doing a cleanup operation because George intended to entrap me and get me put in jail.
Yeah.
How come you haven't won an Emmy yet?
I'm not good enough.
That's true.
Been nominated twice.
But you're sort of up Adam Sharp's ass. I would think you'd get an Emmy.
You think so?
I do think so,
Come
yeah.
have some lunch?
Perfect size for a butt plug. Have a good day, Donnie. I should have taken him up on the offer for lunch and ordered a few lobsters and a 6-pack of beer. But Charles,
and the wine cellar. But
isn't that weird that he would speak to me at all?
Yeah, but what were you saying? It cut out for me. What were you saying about July 13th and him?
In the beginning part of this video, in the room, we can see this piece of equipment against the wall here called an easy rig, which is a camera mount that I particularly dislike. There it is. You see this?
On the right?
Whoops, sorry. Here, it's going to show up in the corner. Just watch the corner by this chair to the right. There
corner.
it is.
That thing,
hook thing. Yeah.
Right.
So that's a weird thing, in my view, to have at this, because that's for walking around with a big, heavy camera. Makes sense to have it at an outdoor rally if you like that type of substandard gear. I mean, people use them, but it's not like some massive clue. It's just interesting that whoever likes easy rigs, I don't know, there's one on July 13th. I haven't seen them in a long, long time. It's a piece of crap in my estimation, but it's just the notable things about this to me is that, first of all, Donnie knows exactly who I am, even though I haven't interacted with him or interfaced with him in almost 8 years. He says, are you still busy crowdsourcing the truth? Are you still friends with George? He's touching his face a lot when I'm asking him about, do you work for the FBI? And he goes right to his training, which is the same thing that Data Republican's mom did, saying, oh, you're jealous that I didn't talk about you. No, I'm not jealous. I'm trying to point out that the story that he wrote was very obviously not about the facts of what happened, but their version of what they wanted to put out about what happened. And as I explained to him here, I think it's a cover-up job being done by the FBI. So I just wanted to show this to people so that they know it's not about me being jealous or me wanting to get credit. I don't even care about any of that. I just want this information to get out. And the reason I make noise about certain people, whether it's Donie or Data Republican or whoever it might be, is because I don't trust those people, and I can't necessarily prove that they've done anything specific, but they're acting in a way that's quite weird, and they might be limited hangouts trying to convince us of something and sort of protect something else. I don't know.
Well, I would go so far as to say that, anything that you see on a mainstream outlet is a limited hangout.
At best, if not outright fake.
Yeah, exactly. People are told you can go into this corner of the room, but you can't open that door, and you can't look into the next room, and you certainly can't look into the basement and the sub-basement.
But I think we need to start evaluating something else, Charles, because think about it for a second. 8 years ago, when you and I first started this, it was, sort of right after the 2016 election. Trump had just won, and we were like doing this sort of new thing in this new Trump era, and everybody sort of recognized that you even said, cord cutting was happening, and people were moving away from mainstream news and more to podcasts and independent journalism. So, okay, we've had now 2 presidential cycles since then. And I think what we're seeing now is, and I spoke about this a little bit with Lee last night, he had some technical problems on his end, but what we're seeing now, Charles, is they realize that they can no longer use the mainstream alone. So they've got people like Donie who cross over because he's very into CNN digital and blogging, whatever. And then they outright have people who they've inserted into this independent news world who are essentially the same exact thing as Operation Mockingbird.
Right. Well, and it leads me to go back, for example, Donie O'Sullivan. I bet you if you look into his background, there's a problem in his background as a guess. Just as who is that guy with the lab mouth that you collaborated with for a while? Claimed you knew Whitey.
You're talking about Mike Moore?
Right. People like that. And people like Flynn. You have a problem in your early life. Maybe it's high school period, maybe it's college, and you're told, listen, everybody makes mistakes, and you could be useful to us. So if you're willing to do what we tell you to do, we'll make sure that nobody makes an issue of this problem that, by the way, is never going away, this problem. So that if you ever try to cross us, we're going to take this problem out of the closet and make it a real problem for you. So I think there are a lot of people like that around this process. And one of them is that guy who claims that he killed Osama bin Laden.
Oh, yeah. The SEAL.
That story to me has never made sense because the people, my middle brother, his father-in-law was a big deal on the board of the Naval Academy, I think, big supporter of the Navy. And what he would do is he had a series of homes, but a beautiful home overlooking the Naval Academy from a distance in Annapolis. And they would have the Blue Angels fly over the house and over the Naval Academy and then back over the house. Then the pilots would come after that event into his house. And there was a party that I went to for a number of years where those pilots were pretty cool people. But more importantly, a large number of Medal of Honor winners, in the past, truly historic figures, would be gathered in an informal setting that I had the privilege to attend. And now, just being polite and out of curiosity, I would ask many of them, so would you be willing to tell me about this award that you got? And to a man, they would say no. We obviously appreciate getting the award, but many great people were left behind on the battlefield, and others are grievously wounded for life. So I actually feel guilty having this award. That was the mentality of the people I met So to see a guy immediately say, "Yeah, I killed Osama bin Laden. I'm the dude. I
Right.
did
It
it."
doesn't track, does it?
It doesn't track. And then beyond that, for him to get in trouble, as he has subsequently gotten into trouble for drunk driving and other issues, tells me that he could also be in the Mike Moore school. He could be somebody who had a problem. He was useful at the time. It was very important to distract from Jerry Corsi's book, Where's the Birth Certificate? It was crucially important to distract from that. And the announcement right before the release of the book that Osama bin Laden was dead just took it sucked a lot of air out of the Jerry Corsi book, as did the release of the fake birth certificate right before the book. So, I mean, I think there almost needs to be, now there's so many billionaires or so many Doge people around, there almost needs to be a department of getting to the truth, of going back through all these controversial stories and saying, now, wait a minute. A lot of these stories did not make sense. Who was involved, misleading, lying to the public? Where are those people now? How grievously has this country, we can forget about the world for a second, but has the country, the United States of America, suffered from the lies told by Deborah Birx and Fauci and others on COVID? Now, how much did those lies cost us? And why are those people walking free today? Now, they shouldn't be. Bill Gates' whole story. He goes to Harvard, supposedly he's smart. He drops out of Harvard and he magically pays somebody $50,000 to get the guts of the software that allow Microsoft to take over the software market. And he's a useful idiot for the deep state ever since. What's his real story? Why would a guy like that hang around with Epstein? How many people have been compromised by Epstein? Why is it taking so long to get to the bottom of all this? What dirty deals are being made? And on my favorite subject, the more I think about it, how do you have a man in Bill Clinton who disgraced the office multiple ways while he was president? And then at the very end, they tag him, make a big issue of his pardon to Mark Rich. That wasn't the big issue. Susan Rosenberg was the big issue. That was an outrageous pardon, as was the pardon of the Puerto Rican terrorists, right? And the big issue there is, how did Eric Holder play dumb through all that? He was the person who was in charge of those pardons. How does he get away with letting these obnoxious, treasonous pardons occur? And then how does the system decide, well, we better investigate the Clinton Foundation, but not the actual fraud, which we're going to allow to mushroom during our investigation? When they started the investigation in February of 2001, Bill hadn't begun gallivanting around the world claiming that his New York-based foundation could do any of this bullshit, right?
Ooh. Well, wait, Charles, I didn't know that these Puerto Rican nationalists were convicted on arms. What does that mean, convicted on arms charges? Were they trading in arms? Because that seems to be what all these people have in common. Adnan Khashoggi and Iran-Contra and Mark Rich and now maybe this FALN. Arms and conspiracy charges. The defendants refused to mount a defense. That's strange, isn't it?
Again, the whole thing it's theater. I mean,
yeah.
So the FBI supposedly, back in February of 2001, you have a new Republican president. The FBI had disproportionately great powers compared to the public at large, right? It had computer systems that we didn't have in the public. Maybe by 2001, people were beginning to use smartphones. I believe I had one. It was a European-based one.
I don't think in 2001, really. I mean, you might have had like a Palm Pilot or something, but really 2006 launched the smartphone.
No.
BlackBerry was around.
No. I had a Nokia phone. The Europeans were ahead of the pack.
Yeah, that's true. They had texting and things.
I had email on my phone.
It still wasn't a smartphone, really.
Okay, but I'm just saying, whatever I had paled in comparison to what the FBI had. So, in February of 2001, the FBI should have been able to do a quick, day-long study, and it should have said, all right, has this entity filed tax returns, the Clinton Foundation? Did it file tax returns for a key portion? The stub period in 97, when Bill Clinton was fighting like hell to to bribe Lewinsky and others who could have really, caused him to be convicted had the truth been known of what was going on. They had a slush fund, the second inaugural presidential trust thing. It had a large balance from the first inauguration, and it raised another 20 plus million. It had over 30 million of dollars that somehow disappeared and for which there has never been an accounting. How much of that money should have been tracked by the FBI? Where's the record of what the FBI did in that first, the real record of the Clinton Foundation investigation? How much work was devoted to studying the flows out of that second inaugural trust? How much work was done studying the message traffic involving Terry McAuliffe and Hillary and others close to the Clintons? What was Terry McAuliffe actually doing, getting that house together for Hillary in Chappaqua, without which she could not have run for Senate?
Oh, right.
There's a lot of stuff that the FBI should have been getting in. How did they not notice in this period where they investigated for 4 years, 2001 to 5, that the Clinton Foundation never filed a tax return using its legal name, never had an audit? That, as we've demonstrated previously, that the early returns are fiction. They use percentages to come up with numbers that to the uninitiated seem credible, but they're just bald-ass estimates. Nobody ever did a real audit of this.
Charles, I'm sorry. I'm trying to not interrupt you, but we've got a break to go to the First Amendment forum.
Sorry.
We need to get you back on the program of having a clock there, because otherwise I look really bad constantly interrupting you. But we have a lot to discuss. And one of the most important things that we haven't even gotten to yet is this Russiagate file release. And there's a lot to discuss about that. So people really should stay with us right now. If you aren't yet sponsoring the show, you can do it on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and of course, for people who subscribe to me on X at JG_CSTT, we'll have the sponsor exclusive video for you right after this. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay with us. We'll be right back.